really exhaustive history of Sanskrit literature, which is one of the desiderata of our studies. One of the useful methods is to do work on regional inquiries, at least for those parts of India which have possessed a sort of autonomy over the periods of history. Such is the case for the province of Kerala, which was protected by its geographical situation, its location from great cultural exchange. Sanskrit literature was cultivated in this region to saturation, at least from 8th century onwards. What might be the reason for the intense cultivation of a language which was quite alien to the land of Malayalam? Professor Louis Renaud, in his review on this book on contribution of Kerala of Raja, states that, I quote, Dr. Raja indicates two main reasons: the existence of several princely courts, each with its own retinue of poets competing each other in patronizing the arts and literature. Secondly, the influx of Brahmins from the north, especially the Nambudris, a group rich and influential, which maintains strictly the right of social superiority, while allowing the younger brothers to marry Kshatriya ladies. The younger brothers, they are allowed to marry Kshatriya ladies, not from the same community. So when they get marital relations with royal families, they are controlling the entire power, these Nambudris. Thus, there was created a class of men without occupation and opulence, and Sanskritic culture were introduced in social ranks where normally it is scarcely penetrates. This is the observation of Renaud. Professor Raja's work consists of a set of learned monographs on the authors, their encourage and their works from their origin to the modern times. Hence, in this book, the narrative is interspersed with quotations. For the ancient period, they are arranged according to the various dynasties around which literary activities centered. Later, according to types. So these two different angles are there. And later, based on according to types. It must be noted that the majority of facts outlined by the book are unknown hitherto. Several dates are confirmed by fresh arguments or modified further. The author has restricted himself to literary works exclusively, also with good reason. The work of Bhasa, he never entertained as Keralite, and whose Kerala connection cannot be proved even now. It is thus that the name of Shankara, even the most illustrious son of Kerala, is not mentioned, even with regard to the purely literary works attributed to him, to Shankara. To sum up, this is a work of high merit, produced by a scholar whose competence has been established since several years in little known fields of Indology. British Council, in an unusual program, sponsored Dr. Kunjun Raja for his second PhD work in Sanskrit from London University. There he worked under Professor John Brough and submitted the thesis titled Indian Theories of Meaning. The purpose of this work is to bring out a systematic form the linguistically relevant views on the different aspects of meaning given by the various scholars of thought in ancient India. Professor Stahl, in his review of this book, states that, I quote, Dr. Raja, a Sanskrit scholar who is well trained in Western, that is British linguistics, under Professor John Brough and Professor Firth, believes that problem of meaning and linguistic analysis are of fundamental importance and were treated in this spirit by Indian theoreticians. Trends of Indian approaches to meaning discussed by Professor Raja deserve serious attention. The illuminating discussions made by him opened new vistas of semantic world. The ancient and medieval thought of India on semantics is well analyzed microscopically to the extent possible. In this context, Professor Raja deals with the contradictory theories of Kumarila Bhatta and Prabhakara, the pioneers in Mimamsa. Kumarila holds the view that none can understand the meaning of a sentence without a previous understanding of the meaning of the individual words. Moreover, if the meaning of a sentence were quite interdependent of the meaning of its constituent words, then any sentence would convey any meaning. That is the complexity of it. But Prabhakara holds entirely a different theory, since he resorts the sentence as the pivot of human speech. Thus, Prabhakara says that all usage is through the sentence and its meaning. The relation that sentence bears to its meaning is permanent. This is an altogether different approach from Kumarila Bhatta. Professor Raja discusses those two approaches in detail along with other theories of Indian thought and arrives at the conclusion that there will be no two opinions on the fact that the word is the pivot of human speech, not sentence. The author could easily arrive at this point based on the data presented by him. It is the context, metaphysical, epistemological, or pragmatic, which should be the final umpire in the judgment of the matter. Professor Siddheshwara Verma, in his review on Indian theories of meaning, reveals how skillfully Dr. Raja presents the logical propriety of the Indian Mimamsaka thought on class, that is Jati, and individual, that is Vyakti and Jati, as the content of meaning. Mimamsaka believes that the primary meaning of a word is universal, which is the essential quality common to the particular instances of the class. Dr. Raja states that from logical point of view, the Mimamsakas seems to be more valid. The Buddhist theories of meaning, as well explained by Professor Raja, and the wrong notion that this is a very complicated area where people are mistaken. Still, several confusions and misunderstandings and notions are prevailing in this field about Buddhist theory of meaning. The Buddhist theory of meaning, as well explained by Professor Raja, and the wrong notion that the predominant feature of the Buddhist concept of meaning was only the negation or elimination of some opposite concept. Example, the cow meant nothing but the elimination of the concept of horse. Is being uprooted now. It is uprooted. Referring to later Buddhists like Sandarakshita, in their works like Tattva Sangraha, Raja establishes authoritatively that Buddhist view definitely pointed out that the negation is not what is apprehended from a word. He says that, I quote Raja, there is nothing incongruous in a single word bringing about two notions, one positive and the other negative. The two notions are not brought about simultaneously. That was the dispute. That was the problem. The positive meaning is known directly, or the negation or exclusion of the everything else is known through implication. accepting the standpoint of Dignaga, he tells us that the mental image of Vikalpa set up as a connotation of the word by Dignaga had an objective reference, which was unthinkable with a negative approach. This is the bone of contention. Consequently, we could conclude from the data so happily brought together that the Buddhist theory of meaning was further evolved, indicating a rapprochement of Buddhist and non-Buddhist theories of meaning during the later evolution of Buddhism in India. This is connected with the history. The semantic environments discussed by Professor Raja needs special mention. It raised the intellectual status of our country. Conditions of knowing the meaning of a sentence were discussed in this treatise in detail. That an utterance is an organic whole, which is quite different from a mere summation of individual words, has been handled here. For the first time, from the linguistic point of view, the organic nature of a human utterance requires a careful analysis of the semantic factors which unite the different words. We used to say yoga, akanksha, yogyata, sannidhi, like that. They are actually the categories akanksha, mutual expectancy, yogyata, that is consistency, etc., have been so exhaustively elucidated by the author of this book, by Indian Theories of Meaning. Siddheshwara Verma again says, I quote, the depth with which the author Raja has investigated these semantic environments could be gauged from his discussion on yogyata. Here he carefully points out the difference between linguistic and logical compatibility. The fact that incompatibility with the actual facts does not prevent verbal comprehension by only the validity of knowledge which he accepts from Kumarila Bhatta made the discussion fruitful. The sublimation of linguistics is the prime achievement of the book Indian Theories of Meaning. Sublimation is the sublimation of linguistics. By bringing meaning to the plane of literary context, it has enormously raised the status of linguistics, which has been comparatively neglected owing to its disassociation from literature. It was disassociated with literature. That's why it has not given to that high level. It has gone to the high level because of linguistically, because of its association with literature. And even what is more important to the student of Indology, it has admirably brought to light the appreciation of literary aspects of meaning by ancient Indian authorities. Indian literary critics do not deny the existence of fixed literal meaning for words and sentences. They accept it, as the previous scholars say, but they believe that over and above all these fixed meanings, there is the suggested meaning or the socio-cultural meaning. It is in these higher planes of literature in which the pivotal features of meaning can be really evaluated. A happy remark of the famous French philologist Vandré, that I quote, Vandré, around the logical meaning of each word, there floats an emotional atmosphere which envelops and penetrates to it. Unquote. After describing the various aspects of the metaphor, primary and secondary, direct or indirect, the author Kunjunni Raja illustrates the further extension of literal and metaphorical meanings by Anandavardhana, so as to include emotive and other associative meanings also under linguistic meaning. That is a very dare attempt made by Professor Kunjunni Raja. Professor Raja elaborately discussed the third potency of language, which Anandavardhana suggests mainly in his magnum opus, namely Dhunyaloka. This potency is the capacity to suggest a meaning other than its literal meaning. This suggestive power of language is called Vyanjana or suggestion. The theory of Spoda received a significant role at the hands of Kunjunni Raja. He considered that Spoda is one of the most important contributions of India to the central problem of semantics in general linguistics. He explains, his explanations created a concrete conviction that the doctrine of Spoda commands a wide influence on Indian thought, particularly on the spiritual side. The author explicitly makes it clear that the word and the meaning are aspects of one and the same thing. He quotes the first verse of Raghuvamsha, which depicts Shiva and Parvati as Shabda and Artha. Here, the poet Kalidasa made it clear that Shiva and Parvati are aspects of one and the same, like word and its meaning. Not only in spiritual plane, but also in the rhetorical domain, the influence of Spoda is distinctly visible. Professor Raja went to extent of saying that it was the inspiration from the exposition of Spoda in Vakyapadiya that led Anandavardhana to set up his theory of suggestion. Professor Siddheshwara Varma, at the fag end of his critical observation on Indian theories of meaning, arrives at the conclusion that, I quote, this book, by virtue of its intellectual range, is worthy of our unusual attention. The great service rendered by it is the sublimation of linguistics. The study of such a book develops upon the reader to continue and extend the stimulating points roused by the book. Adayar saw Kunjunni Raja in 1943. Adayar saw Kunjunni Raja in 1943. He came over there as a research scholar. When other boys were at their games in the Adayar beach, Kunjunni Raja made company with books. His affinity towards library made him to stay there itself for decades together. After retirement from Madras University, he became honorary director of this prestigious library and research center. His academic activities frequently snatched him from Adayar to far and wide of the globe, but it remained as a permanent abode for him, Adayar Library. Dr. Kunjunni Raja wrote more than 30 books and published more than 200 research papers on various Indological subjects. He was the editor of the prestigious volume of Catalogus Catalogorum, published by University of Madras. At Adayar, he was the editor of the Adayar Library Bulletin. He has edited numerous books in Sanskrit and Malayalam and embellished several unique works with his scholarly introductions. His critical review on books connected with the Sanskrit language and literature, Malayalam, technical arts like Kudiyatam, Kathakali, etc., reveal the depth of his insight and scholarship. The readers could easily see from the many papers that how varied was Professor Raja's scholarly interests. The clarity of his vision, the accuracy of his treatment, and the brevity of his explanation are no doubt ideal, worth emulating by young research scholars. The doctoral student of Sanskrit as a whole, the doctoral students as a whole are indebted to this great intellectual giant who made his surname Midukan Tamburan. Midukan in Malayalam means the most efficient, the most efficient. That is the meaning of Midukan in Malayalam. So the most efficient scholar in the field of Indology. With these humble remarks, I beg to remain. Thank you for patient hearing.
Thank you, Professor Murli Madhavan, for your presidential paper, in which you brought in succinct way the contribution of Dr. K. Kunjuni Raja to Indological studies, and particularly to the Indian theories of meaning. And you rightly pointed out that Dr. Raja had the great foundation in the traditional Oriental way of learning, coupled with the modern acumen of critical analysis. And it is this attitude of the harmonious blend between the two which has made this book, Indian Theories of Meaning, very popular toward the world. And you rightly pointed out about the friendship between Professor George Cardona and Professor Rajan. In fact, I am a bit nostalgic about this. Whenever Professor George Cardona used to visit Madras University in the 1970s, I was a research scholar there, and Dr. Raja would depute me to take care of Professor George Cardona about his stay and visit to the other research institutes. And now it is the time that we are eagerly looking for, namely the inaugural paper by Professor George Cardona on Vyakyanadaha Vishesha Pratipattihi, interpretation as necessary tool. I now welcome Professor George Cardona to deliver his inaugural address. Professor Cardona ji. Professor Cardona ji.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Please.
Okay. I will begin with a small correction. Many months ago, when Murli Madhavan first invited me, I said, yes, my talk will be on Yakyanato Vishesha Pratipattihi Nahi Sandehana Lakshanam, but then I changed it.
Okay.
And unfortunately, that title remained. I sent I sent everybody who was on the list a few days ago a short version of the present paper. Now, Murli Madhavan also asked me to say a few words about Kunjuni Raja and as I knew him. So I will say something there. It is my pleasure to attend the inaugural session of this conference in honor of the centennial of the birth of Kunjuni Raja, to accept the centenary Raja Brahma Puraskar, and to offer cash prizes to rank holders from universities in Kerala. I've also been asked to say a few words about Kunjuni Raja's career. The thing that strikes me about his career, in addition to his being a magnificent scholar, was the continuity of a lineage. His uncle, C. Kunjan Raja, was the first professor of Sanskrit at the University of Madras, a position later held by his teacher and dissertation guide, Professor V. Raghavan. Under the tutelage of the latter, Kunjuni Raja wrote his first major work, his doctoral thesis, as everybody has mentioned again, The Contribution of Kerala to Sanskrit Literature, completed in 1948, and then published in 1958, with a second edition in 1980. As did his uncle, who took a degree at Oxford University, so did Kunjuni Raja also take a degree in England at University of London, where he studied with John Brough, who was then the head of the School of Oriental and African Studies, and came under the influence also of the linguist Firth. The results of these studies is his second major work, Indian Theories of Meaning, first published in 1954, subsequently published by the Adyar Library in 1963, second edition, and then finally a reprint in 1977. The breadth of Kunjuni Raja's scholarship matches that of his illustrious predecessors, and it is not possible to do justice in such a brief sketch, nor do I have to, since a very good sketch was given earlier at this very conference. Let me just stress that he was also a very good editor. And part of his editing work was the Catalogus Catalogorum, of which he edited volumes 6 to 11 after his predecessor V. Raghavan edited volumes 1 to 5. Now, on a personal level, I would add that I found him to be not only a wonderful colleague with whom I had the pleasure of discussing and arguing in Yakarana, Mimamsa, and other areas, but he was also a warm personal friend. When I first met him, I was young. I was 29 years old. He was then a reader where Raghavan was professor. This was in 1966. And not to be shy about it, Raghavan was kind of unapproachable. He was the Maharaja there. Kunjuni Raja was the friend that I could associate with and talk to. And we would meet often and go to a coffee shop on Mount Road and things like that. He was also a warm personal friend. And this aspect of calm, that is, he combined, as everybody has already said, jnana and vinaya. The vinaya aspect of him was clear to anyone who ever met him. He was a very humble, unassuming man, but he had definite ideas and he would argue them. And I want to stress two of these points. By no means does this mean that he could not disagree with colleagues and argue his points strongly. On the contrary, for example, in the contribution of Kerala to Sanskrit literature on pages 130 to 134, he argues with an older colleague, Venkata Subramanya Iyer. Kunjuni Raja claimed that the traditional date of Narayana Bhatta was wrong, that he died some years earlier than the tradition says he died. Venkata Subramanya Iyer disagreed, and they went back and forth like that, from one book to the next, and they never reached an agreement, but they never ceased to be good friends. Another aspect of this has to do with his second great book, Indian Theories of meaning. The French scholar Madeleine Biardot wrote a review of this in the Indo-Iranian Journal in 1964, in which she was quite harsh, in elegant French, but quite harsh, arguing and criticizing the general outlook of what she called Anglo-Saxon philosophers of language. And that term Anglo-Saxon is very important. There's the opposite, the contrast between the continental and the Anglo-Saxon, in the framework of which Kunjuni Raja's work is said to fit. And Biardot argued that this author failed to deal, that is, that Kunjuni Raja's work failed to deal with issues in a specifically Indian framework. Now, this is obviously wrong. Kunjuni Raja put everything in the Indian context. But in the introduction to the second edition of Indian Theories of Meaning, Kunjuni Raja then quite sharply, though very subtly, disagreed with her and said, well, you may claim that, but Kumarila Bhatta argued with Bhartrihari not from religious point of view, but on the linguistics point of view. So that I am perfectly justified in taking the attitude I took. Now I come to my own paper, which is on a much more narrow subject. But I mean, it is undeniable that anywhere we approach anything in any technical shastra in India, Vyakhyana has to come in. So that Vyakhyana to Vishesha Pratipatti is there everywhere. But I'm dealing specifically with one sutra of Panini and aspects of it. And my main argument is simply to summarize so that you get a map of where I'm going, is as follows. The sutra says, Sut Prak Sut Kat Purvaha. That is, Sut, the Agama Sut is introduced. This is and Sut is marked with Ta, so that it is the initial element of the initial part of the element to which it is introduced. Adyanto, Takito. But at the same time, Panini has to say Kat Purvaha. So for example, you have to say that you have to allow this augment, Sut, that although it is introduced as the initial segment of a pada, formed from a verbal base such as kri and kri, which begin with ka, it must precede the ka in cases where the item in question does not begin with this consonant. In my paper, I outline the main sutras that are at issue. The thing about it is that if you have something like sam plus karoti, you get sanskaroti. But if you have the lung form of that, it has to be sam askarot. That is the sa, the sut, has to precede the ka. Now, these forms that are, we have to assume, we have to know that at a certain time in the language of Panini, these sutras are counted for, that is the sutra, Sut Kat Purvaha, accounted for a certain set of forms which are used in Panini's language at his time and in his culture. That's point one. Point two is that the language changed. This is important because many people consider wrongly that the language froze, that Panini was instrumental in freezing the language. so that it became unchangeable thereafter. The language was a living language and continued to change, so that at the time of Patanjali, you had different forms introduced into the language. This then created a tension. The sutras of Panini himself could not account for everything in that we have later. This then calls for Vyakhyana. That is, you have to interpret the sutras in order to allow for these later forms. That's the basic argument here. Now, the forms that are discussed in the Mahabhashya are of the following types. That you have type A, that you have compounds. Now, I will pronounce these as the problem is that you have some. I'm speaking to an audience predominantly of Southern Indians, so I will wrongly say, not say Samskrita. I will say Sanskrita or Sanskrita. That is, that you have either Sanskrita with an Anunasika or Sanskrita with Anuswara following the That's in the compound. Then you have things like the perfect forms, Sanchaskara. Now, at the time that Patanjali is describing his language, using the sutras, the Pratama Vivachana is Chan Sanchaskaratuhu. It is like Sansmaratuhu. This contrast with Chakara, Chakratuhu, Chakruhu. Now you have Sam Chakaratuhu and Sam Chakaruhu, as you have Sansmaratuhu, Smaratuhu, Sasmaratuhu, and Sasmaruhu. Then you have types C, where you have the causative aorist, which at the time of Patanjali was Samachiskarat. Achiskarat, like a Bimrajat, from Bhrajati, Bhrajate. Contrasting with Achikarat, with a Dirgha. We have Achiskarat with a Hraswa, E, contrasting with Achikarat with long E. Then you have the Ashir Ling form, Sanskrishishta, which contrasts with Strishishta, from Stri to Stru, to cover, or Starishishta. So you have a tension there. Some forms conform to the type of dhatu that begins with a simple consonant, some that begins with a sanyoga. Now, Panini's description has a background. It is preceded by earlier grammarians. We know that Shakalya, the author of the Padapatha to the Rig Veda, preceded Panini. Panini knows about him. I think this is well known. I mean, Panini has a sutra that says Sambundhau Shakalya Setava Narshe Unyahu. This is Shakalya. It's precisely what Shakalya does in his Padapatha. We have reflected there. Now, in his Padapatha, this is under section 2 of the paper. By the way, I will be sending a corrected form of this paper to all the people who are in the audience. You have forms. So, for example, if you have kri, to make, to do, with pari, you have in the first example, the Samhita has parishkrinvan. the Padapatha divides it as Pari Avagraha Krinvan. That is, it treats it as a composite element in which Pari is the first element. It is still a Pada, although it is a subordinate Pada because it is not followed by a full Danda. It is followed by an Avagraha pause and Krinvan. Then you have the other type where you have in the Sanghita, example 2, Parishkrinvanti, and the Padapatha has Pari, Danda, full Pada, plus Krinvanti. That is, there's the contrast that is reflected in Panini's language also, where, for example, you have the Gatir Gatau says that a Gati followed by a Gati is Sarvam Anudattam. And then the next sutra says, Tingicho Dattavati, also if it is followed by a Tinganta, which bears the Udatta. So this is example 1. Pari of Parishkrinvan is Anudatta because the form. Now in Parikrinvanti, you have Krinvanti is Anudatta, therefore the upasarga that precedes it retains its udatta and is an independent pada. This is important. And I've given all of the other examples, and now I go to the Rikprati Shakya. Now, the way that the Rikprati Shakya deals with this is totally different from Panini's way. And this is in section 212. The sutra says, Pariti Padye Kripare Shakaraha, and you understand Antara. That is, if you have a Purva Pada, a prior constituent of a compound, Pari, and this is followed by Kri, then between the two, Antara, Madhye, you get Sha. That is that the segment Sha, as in Parishkurvanti, Parishkrinvanti, comes between the segments. Okay? Similarly, well, that's the main argument there. Now, the thing about it is that in Shakalya system and Shaunaka system, the Sha and the Sa is not made part of any pada. It is abhakta. This is the view that will be taken much later by the Kashika. Now, it is equally noteworthy that the Padapatha has Sanskritaha that corresponds exactly to the Padapatha. It does not break these up. You have Parishkritaha in the Sanghita, but Parikritaha in the Padapatha. But you would have Sanskritaha and Sanskritaha as a samasa together with no avagraha in both the Sangraha, in both the Sanghita Patha and the Padapatha. Why? Because in the system as envisaged by Shakalya, some followed by this Sa was not subject to the normal rules of Sandhi, which would allow for the Ma to be replaced by Anuswara, because that S is not a Padadi element. That is, it comes between the two, and consequently, you can't treat it as a composite triggering Sanghita changes. Same sorts of things we find in the Taittiriya Sanghita. I'm not going to go through it because time is short. And I go immediately to Panini system. And this is important to realize because it's not pointed out in many places. In Panini system, an upasarga, such as sam or pari, is part of a separate pada, including a nominal ending, which precedes a verbal pada. That is, you do not, although semantically, you would say that sam plus kri form a semantic unit because of its semantics, to adorn or to aggregate. From the grammatical point of view, there is no sam kri. That may be a dictionary entry in a modern dictionary, but it is not an entry in the dhatu patha. You simply have kri, dukrin. So you have a separate pada, which is syntactically connected. For example, if you have sanskaroti, he adorns, or parishkaroti, also he adorns. These are derived, and this is on page 6 of the paper that I sent you, from the alaukika vakya, sam plus su plus kri plus lat, and pari plus su plus kri plus lat, in which the first triplet ending su follows each verb, preverb, upasarga, and the L affix, lakara, lat, is introduced on condition that an agent is to be signified, follows the base kri. Then you have a series of operations, applies there, which I don't have to go through. The main one later is that once you have this, the sutra that says Sut Kat Purvaha is followed by a series of sutras, the first one of which is Samparibhyang Karoto Bhushane. If you have Kri, Karoti, linked to the Upasarga Sam or Pari, in the sense of adorning, Bhushana, then this augment Sut is added to the verbal stem. The result of that is Sam 15b, 16b, plus Skaroti. That is, Skaroti is a separate pada. Now, in addition to that, then the pada Sam undergoes a major change, a major operation. That is, Ru replaces the Mo of Sam. By the sutra, it says Samasuti, the Makara is replaced by Ru, and simultaneously, by the sutras, it says Atranunasika Purvasya Tuva and Anunasikat Paranuswaraha. Then the vowel that precedes this Mo that is replaced by Ru is then either replaced by a nasalized vowel, Anunasika, or followed by Anuswara. This then gives you forms with Sam, Sa, or Sam, plus Sa, plus Skaroti. That is 2 sakaras. This is very different from the usual addition that you have. The additions that are printed always write Sanskaroti with Bindu and one S, one Sa. This is in conformity with what Patanjali says, Eke, some people hold that Ma Makara Lopaha, that Ma is deleted with nasalization. Okay. Now, by the same token that these things, that some combines with a pada, and that pada that is associated with some will take the agama, sutta. By the same token, we should get some plus chakara, giving us some plus chaskara. This form is actually attested in Yaska twice. But by the same procedure, then if you have sam plus a pada, then you have sam plus chakratuhu, sam plus chakruhu, giving you then sans chakratuhu and sans chakruhu. Sam chakruhu. You should not have chakratuhu and chakaratuhu and chakaruhu there as you get later. Now, nothing that Panini says in his Ashtadhyayi casts doubt on this. However, according to Patanjali, the forms used in his time were sanchaskaratuhu, sanchaskaruhu. And similarly, the causative aorist was in Patanjali's time, samachiskarat, not samachiskarat. Now, the most plausible explanation for this state of affairs, that is that Panini presupposes one set of forms, Patanjali actually says, no, we have this other set of forms, is that historical developments took place as a result of which forms of Kri used with some not only received an augment sut, but gradually were treated as though they contained a base, a dhatu, with an initial cluster, a sanyoga, ska. Thus, sanchaskaratuhu and sanchaskaruhu came to be paired with sanchaskara in parallel to a set like sasmara, sasmaratuhu, sasmaruhu. Similarly, some achiskarat is of the type abhimrajat, caused to shine from the base mraj. This scenario is supported by certain facts. To begin with, the Mahabhashya discussion on Sut Kat Purvaha mentions Sanskriyate, Sanskrishishta, but does not say that there are forms comparable to Smaryate or Starishishta. That is, there were not comparable forms in the passive and the Ashishi Ling comparable to the forms from bases in with initial clusters. That is, there was already a mixed set of forms in Patanjali's time that has to result from some development. As a result, my conclusion then is, as a result of linguistic developments then, Sat, Sut, Kat, Purvaha, as formulated by Panini, was subject to scrutiny in lights of later forms. This is the end of my brief discussion, but I say I consider the detailed discussion in the Mahabhashya in the appendix which follows. The whole paper is 60 pages long. I sent you a paper which is 8 pages long, which is the summary. So I hope my main points are clear. One, we start out with Vedic usage. This Vedic usage is analyzed in a certain way. Panini inherits that knowledge. He composes his grammar for the language as he described it. In that language, the prakriya is such that the upasarga and the tinganta are separate padas. If you want, I can prove that to you. Therein, you have to assume that there are certain forms and that these forms were subject to later changes that resulted in what we might call a mixed paradigm at the time of Patanjali, Katyayana and Patanjali, which required them to enter into long discussions on how to interpret the sutra in question. And with that, I will finish. Thank you.
Professor Cardona-ji, for your very brilliant and penetrating paper. In fact, you have delved deep into this very formation of the word Samskrita or Sanskrita, the word by which this great language is known. And we are very fortunate exposition by you. And there's no doubt that even Anandavardhana says, he gives a certificate to the grammarians. Pratame Vidwamsaha Vayyakarnaha.
Yes, yes, indeed.
And that is proved beyond doubt that it requires great skill to dive deep into such nuances of the grammar, because even such a subtle change, differences between Parish Krunvanne or Pari Krunvanne, very beautifully you have analyzed and presented this paper. We are indeed very, very fortunate to listen to your talk on the inaugural paper. And now it is the time to present the Rajaprabha Puraskar. The Kunjani Raja Academy of Indological Research gives the Rajaprabha Puraskar every year. But this year it is very, very significant because we are celebrating the centenary year of Professor Kunjani Raja. Therefore, there's a special centenary Rajaprabha Puraskar 2020. I now request Professor Murli Madhavan, the chairman of the Academy of Indological Research, to give the Puraskar. I will read out the citation. Citation presented to Professor George Cardona, Pennsylvania University, USA, along with the Kunjani Raja Birth Centenary Rajaprabha Puraskar 2020. Born in 1936, George Cardona did his post-graduation in Yale University, which conferred on him the PhD with distinction in 1960 for his thesis, The Indo-European Thematic Ioris. Starting his teaching profession in the Pennsylvania University in 1960, Dr. Cardona served the university for nearly 4 decades as professor of linguistics and as emeritus professor. The contribution of Dr. Cardona to linguistics in general and Paninian grammar in particular has been immense and varied. No wonder that he used to be referred to as Abhinava Panini. In recognition of his erudition, he was honored with the highest oriental titles of Maha Upadhyaya by Sri Lal Bahadur Shastri Rashtriya Sanskrit Vidyapita in 2006 and the Vidya Vachaspati by Rashtriya Sanskrit Sansthan in 2012. The Rabindra Bharati University conferred the degree of D.Litt on him in the year 2008. Dr. Cardona has been a distinguished visiting professor in many universities in India and abroad. He has presided over the grammar sessions of the 10th, 12th, and 15th World Sanskrit Conferences in Bangalore, Helsinki, and New Delhi, respectively. He was honored with the highest academic award in India by the President of India, Certificate of Honor in Sanskrit, on the 15th of August 2012. While Dr. Kunjani Raja was making pioneering studies on Indian theories of meaning, his close octogenarian friend, Dr. Cardona, brought to light the best of Paninian Vyakarana. The Kunjani Raja Academy of Indological Research is happy and privileged to present the Kunjani Raja
Moment.
Birth Centenary Rajaprabha Puraskar 2020 to Dr. George Cardona, Professor of Linguistics, Pennsylvania University, USA. Dated the 11th December 2020 and signed by Professor Murli Madhavan, the chairman, and Sri Girish Paliat, the secretary. Now I request Murli Madhavan to that is the
Hello.
Puraskar.
Hello, Professor George Cardona.
Yes,
We are very happy and privileged to present this great award in the name of a great Sanskrit scholar of Kerala and your close friend, Professor Kunjani Raja. This Puraskara is named after Professor Raja Prabha. The Raja word stands for Kunjani Raja. And this Raja Prabha Puraskar is a special one because this is not annual award. This is a centenary, birth centenary award. So this is being presented to Professor George Cardona with all respect and love.
You can just show it even closer, Professor Murli Madhavan.
Professor, yes. I think this award plate is visible to you.
yes, yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm very grateful and honored that you have given me this award. I'm happy to be in this very august lineage. And since we're speaking of lineage, I might mention, I forgot to mention in the course of my paper, there were several typographical errors that I caught, and then I'm fortunate to have a former student with better eyes than me, Peter Sharp, who sent me additional corrections. So it's always good to have successors, and I'm happy to be associated with such a great man. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Murli Madhavan,
yes,
for making this presentation, and thank you, Professor George Cardona, for your
thank you.
reply after receiving that award.
Yes.
Now I am very glad to announce that Professor George Cardona has instituted a cash prize to the rank holders of the various universities which teach Sanskrit in Kerala. I now request Shri Girish Paliat to read out the names of the recipients of this cash award instituted by Professor Cardona.
Thank you, Professor Radhakrishnan. It is a great gesture by Cardona to institute this. Let me read out the recipients of this award from the various. We have Amrita KB, the rank holder from Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit Gallery. Shiny E from University of Anismita LS from the University of Kerala, and Hima PH from Mahatma Gandhi University. Congratulations to them.
Yeah.
Now
I am going to read out the certificate. Kunjani Raja Academy of Indological Research, KAIR, Aluva, Ernakulam District, Kerala. Certificate of Cash Award. This is to certify that Amrita K. has won the Kunjani Raja Centenary Cash Award instituted by Professor George Cardona, University of Pennsylvania, USA, for obtaining first rank in postgraduate examinations of Sanskrit Sahitya 2020 from Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit, Kaladi, Kerala. We congratulate her for the receipt of award and wish a bright academic future. Dated 11th December 2020. Girish Paliat, Secretary. PC Murali Madhavan, Chairman.
Next.
The next one is Kunjuniraja Academy of Indological Research KAIR, Aluva, Ernakulam District, Kerala, Certificate of Cash Award. This is to certify that Anismita LS has won the Kunjuniraja Centenary Cash Award instituted by Professor George Cardona, University of Pennsylvania, USA, for obtaining first rank in postgraduate examinations of Sanskrit Sahitya 2020 from University of Kerala, Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. We congratulate her the receipt of award and wish a bright academic future. Dated 11th December 2020. Girish Paliath, Secretary, PC Murali Madhavan, Chairman.
Jijo. Yes. Jijo.
Third one, Kunjuniraja Academy of Indological Research, KAIR, Aluva, Ernakulam District, Kerala, Certificate of Cash Award. This is to certify that Srimati Hima PH has won the Kunjuniraja Centenary Cash Award instituted by Professor George Cardona, University of Pennsylvania, USA, for obtaining first rank in postgraduate examination of Sanskrit Sahitya 2018 from Mahatma Gandhi University, Kottayam, Kerala. We congratulate her for the receipt of the award and wish a bright academic future. Dated 11th December 2020. Girish Paliath, Secretary, PC Murali Madhavan, Chairman.
Thank you.
And fourth one, Kunjuniraja Academy of Indological Research, KAIR, Aluva, Ernakulam District, Kerala, Certificate of Cash Award. This is to certify that Srimati Shiny E has won the Kunjuniraja Centenary Cash Award instituted by Professor George Cardona, University of Pennsylvania, USA, for obtaining first rank in postgraduate examination of Sanskrit Sahitya 2020 from University of Calicut, Kerala. We congratulate her for the receipt of the award and wish a bright academic future. Dated 11th December 2020. Girish Paliath, Secretary, PC Murali Madhavan, Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Narayanan and Mr. Jijo.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor George Cardona ji, for instituting the cash prize to the rank holders in the various universities in Kerala. This will go a long way in encouraging the young scholars to take up Sanskrit studies in all seriousness. And we are very much grateful to you for instituting this cash prize award. And I am sure this will be a regular feature in the years to come. Thank you so much, sir. Now I just call upon the 4 recipients to say a few words of their words of gratitude towards this scholarship that they are going to receive. First of all, Amrita KB. In 2 minutes. Amrita KB.
Amrita KB എന്താ കാണിക്കാത്തതിന് Amrita KB എടുക്കൂ നിങ്ങൾ ഇതില് കാണിച്ച സ്ക്രീനിൽ വരാൻ
Amrita KB, yes, please.
Good evening to all. Respected Dr. PC Murali Madhavan, Chairman of Kunjuniraja Academy of Indological Research, Professor George Cardona, the chief guest of this program, all other dignitaries, and my dear friends. I have great pleasure to be with you in this program. I am very happy to receive this valuable prize from such a great Sanskrit scholar, Professor George Cardona. I express my sincere gratitude to Kunjuniraja Academy of Indological Research for conducting this informative program and giving me such an inspiring prize. I express my sincere gratitude to Professor George Cardona also. Let me conclude. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
all.
you. Thank you, Amrita. Next, Anismita Velas of University of Kerala. Anismita.
Anismita Matu Narena.
Anismita.
Irund Vitti Maru, Anismita.
Anismita.
Not.
Huh? Is she there, Anismita?
No, you can.
Then next,
Mute
Hima.
Dr. Radhakrishnan, you can
Yes.
call the next person.
Hima PH. Hima. Hima PH. Hima. Yeah, now Hima, please.
Anismita has come. Anismita has come. So
Okay.
please give chance to her.
Yeah, please. Anismita.
Good evening to one and all present here. First of all, I express my sincere gratitude for being able to participate in this webinar. I am very honored to receive this cash award from famous American Sanskrit scholar George Cardona sir. I express my sincere gratitude to George Cardona sir and the members of Kunjuniraja Academy of Indological. For this award.
Thank you, Anismita. Next, Hima PH. Hima PH. Hima
She's on
PH.
screen.
Please.
Sir, good evening to all. Firstly, I am thankful to God. I never expected to receive this award. I express my sincere gratitude to Professor George Cardona, sir, Department of Yagarna, Pennsylvania University from USA, and Kunjuniraja Academy of Indological Research. I will never forget this moment. I am also thankful to Professor Murali Madhavan, sir. I am thanking my beloved parents and teachers for the great support. I thank all the participants attending this international webinar. Let me conclude my words. Thank you.
Thank you, Hima. Next, Shiny E, University of Calicut. Shiny. Shiny. Is she on the screen? Shiny E, please. Shiny. Not audible. Unmute. Professor Murali Madhavan, unmute yours. Shiny is not visible on the screen. Yeah.
Please, Shiny, please come.
Left.
I heard her voice. What happened to her? Because of Wi-Fi problem, I think so.
Okay, then we'll go pass on to the next.
Camera on camera on
let her, but sound is not here. It is not the problem with camera. It is even sound is not here. Okay, if she turns up before the before concluding the function, if she turns up before that, we will allow her a
Yeah.
chance. Now you can proceed. Now you
Yeah.
can proceed. Yeah.
Now we'll go on to the next very important portion of this function, inaugural function, namely the presentation of the very prestigious annual Rajaprabha Puraskar. We are very proud and very happy that Professor Srinivas Varkhedi, the Vice Chancellor of Kavikula Guru Kalidas University, Ramchek, has been selected for the Rajaprabha Puraskar 2020. I request Professor Murli Madhavan, the chairman of the Academy of Indological Research, to give the presentation, and Dr. K.A. Ravindran will be reading the citation. Dr. Ravindran.
Kunyunni Raja Academy of Indological Research, KAIR, Aluva, Ernakulam District, Kerala.
Please wait. Please wait.
Okay.
Let us give the screen to Varkhedi ji.
Okay. Okay.
Srinivasa Varkhedi.
Yeah. Namaste.
One minute. We are getting.
Namaskaromi. Namaste.
Namaste.
Professor Murli Madhavan?
Yes, we are getting him in the screen.
Okay, please.
Okay.
Namaste.
We are seeing only Cardona ji.
Namaskaromi.
Varandallo.
I am here upasthitaha. I am here. I am present here.
നമ്മുടെ വീഡിയോ ഓപ്പൺ ആവത്തന്നെ
Sir,
Murli Madhavan.
a slight problem. He is not visible here.
No, you can keep speaker's view. You just keep speaker's
Yeah.
No.
I am not very much acquainted with the this type of technologies. I am a poor Sanskrit teacher.
Kritagnosmi.
Dr. Ravindran.
Yes, okay. Kunyunni Raja Academy of Indological Research, KAIR, Aluva, Ernakulam District, Kerala. Citation presented to Professor Srinivasa Varkhedi, Vice Chancellor, KKSU, along with annual Rajaprabha Puraskar 2020. Professor Srinivasa Varkhedi is the Vice Chancellor of Kavikula Guru Kalidasa Sanskrit University, Ramtak, Maharashtra, and acting Vice Chancellor of Gondwana University, Gadchiroli. Professor Varkhedi is well known for his contribution towards interdisciplinary studies and research, and for his efforts to bridge the gap between traditional and modern academia. He has extensively worked in the field of Sanskrit computational linguistics and natural language processing. His current interests are Sanskrit pedagogy, e-repository for Sanskrit, research methodology of Shastras, and philosophy of language. Professor Varkhedi served as a member of the committee constituted by MHRD for drafting vision and roadmap for Sanskrit. He is a part of the guidelines preparation committee for Sanskrit universities in National Assessment and Accreditation Council, Government of India. He has edited more than 30 works and published several scholarly research papers in Sanskrit, as well as in English and Kannada in national and international journals. He has been an editor of the conference proceedings of International Symposia on Sanskrit Computational Linguistics. He authored The Path of Prose, Pramana Paddhati of Sri Jayatirtha, rendering into English Paschatyam Tarkashastram, Panjiga Prabanja, and many. Dr. Varkhedi has organized and participated in innumerable symposia, colloquia, conferences, seminars, and workshops as resource persons, special invitee, and delivered more than 50 keynote lectures at many reputed organizations, and also was chief guest for many convocations. Organizing All India Oriental Conference 50th session, 100th year celebration was one among them. Professor Srinivasa Varakhedi is a recipient of Maharshi Badarayan Vyas Samman in 2008. Dr. Varakhedi also received Swami Chinmayananda Research Gold Medal in 2013. Kunjuni Raja Academy of Indological Research is happy and privileged to present the annual Rajaprabha Puraskar 2020 to Professor Srinivasa Varakhedi, Vice Chancellor, KKSU, Ramtak, Maharashtra. Dated 11th December 2020, Secretary Girish Paliat, Secretary, PC Murali Madhavan, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ravindran. May I now request Professor Srinivas Varakhedi to say a few words by way of reply. Professor Varakhedi.
दिव्य मार्गेण समागत्य तेजोरूपेण समुपस्थितेभ्यः सर्वेभ्यः नानाशास्त्र विद्या समुपासकेभ्यः विद्वद्भ्यः आरादेव विरचितोऽयं प्रणाम करबन्धः. Professor Radhakrishnan, chairperson of this session, Professor Acharya George Cardona, chief guest of this function, Professor PC Murali Madhavan, chairperson of this organization, Academy of Research. Adyame Sudinam Manne Prasannam Gurudaivatam. Adyame Sudinam Manne Prasannam Gurudaivatam Rajaprabha Puraskritya Bhagyadwaram Apavrutam. Rajaprabha Puraskritya Bhagyadwaram Apavrutam. Kunjunni Raja Martanda Vidya Vibhava Bhutaye Namaste Shabda Vijnana Kala Sahitya Samvide. Namaste Shabda Vijnana Kala Sahitya Samvide.
Great.
Bhavad Grantha Kalamatra Samupasana Hetuna. Bhavad Grantha Kalamatra Samupasana Hetuna Prapta Raja Prabha Kirtihi Vidvadvamsha Vasham Vadaha Shrivaraha Dhanyatam Yati. Shrivaro Dhanyatam Yati. Vidusham Panktimashritaha. Adhamaranyam Bhaje Badham. Adhamaranyam Bhaje Badham Mai Priti Matamaham. I am highly indebted to the chairperson, Professor PC Murali Madhavanji, and other distinguished members of Sri K. Kunjuni Raja Academy of Indological Studies for conferring the annual Rajaprabha Award on me on this special occasion of centenary celebrations of Acharya, late Sri Kunjuni Raja. Professor Kunjuni Raja was a Dian of Indian Indological Studies of 20th century. Of course, I don't find any young scholars who is not indebted to his contributions. I have no words to thank you all for this love and affection that you have shown to me. I carry these wonderful memories for my lifetime. I am also inspired to work in the path in the unique path of research directed by late Shri Kunjuni Raja. I am thankful to Kunjuni Raja Academy of Indological Studies for considering me for this award. I don't know how I am eligible for this, but definitely I consider that this will inspire me to take the path shown by the great scholars of this lineage. I'm so grateful that for the presence of Shri Acharya George Cardona during this ceremony. You know, Kadachidevam Bhavati Pandite Paramana, no, Parvate Paramanocha Parvata Padarthantam Pratishtitam. Parvate Paramanocha Padarthantam Pratishtitam. Adya Tatra Parvatopyasti Paramanurapyadritaha. Ataha Ham Padarthatva Matrena Padarthatva Matrena Tayo Avashyam Sadrishyam Asti iti aham. अतः तद् भवन्तः नैयायिकाः मुरली माधवन महोदयः नैयायिकाः ते पर्वते परमाणुश्च पदार्थत्वमेव पश्यन्ति अन्यत् न पश्यन्ति. You cannot see other distinctions. You can see only this much. Padarthatvam is samanyam. Samanyavadinah bhavanti bhavantah. So I'm thankful for your love and affection. At the same time, I would like to donate this award amount to the Department of Vyakarana of Kalidasa Sanskrit University for organizing a wonderful program in memory of Professor Kunjuni Raja. Because even in Central University, central part of India, we should celebrate his name. We should celebrate Professor Kunjuni Raja. And I consider this is an opportunity for us to really get the blessings of Professor Kunjuni Raja, and in his memory, some distinguished program will be organized, or a research work in his memory shall be taken up by the Department of Vyakarana. I consider this as a blessing, and I personally contribute some additional amount for this program, and that will be organized in the central in Nagpur itself in order to celebrate the memories of Shri Professor Kunjuni Raja. And I once again remain thankful to you all and express my pranamas to Honorable Chairman and other members with my humble pranams. Dhanyavad.
Dhanyavadaha. Boho Srinivasa Mahabhagaha. We are very grateful to you, sir, for receiving this award. And you have demonstrated here itself your command of the traditional language by way of your excellent slogas which you have composed for this occasion, and also your thorough knowledge of the technology which you have demonstrated on the screen itself. And thank you so much for being with us to receive this award. Now, we have one more final part of this inaugural session, namely the release of the book of a collection of papers by Dr. K. Kunjuni Raja. And all the research articles of Professor Kunjuni Raja have been brought out and edited by Dr. P.C. Murali Madhavan. And now I request Professor George Cardona and Professor Srinivas Varkediji to release this book, which is given the title as Theories of Aesthetic Rapture.
He is brought.
Yeah. Yeah, please, you can show that.
Okay, I'm showing it also.
They can show. Professor Murali Madhavan, they will show it.
Oh, good. Very nice.
കുറച്ചുകൂടി സെൻട്രൽ ആയിട്ടുള്ളൂ
സെൻട്രൽ ആക്കണം.
നിങ്ങളുടെ ഈ ഭാഗത്തേക്ക് റൈറ്റ് സൈഡില്, നിങ്ങളുടെ റൈറ്റ് സൈഡിലേക്ക്, അല്ല ലെഫ്റ്റ് സൈഡിലേക്ക്. കുറച്ചുകൂടി നിങ്ങളുടെ മുഖത്തിന്റെ നേരെ വെച്ചാൽ മതി. ആ ഇപ്പൊ കാണുന്നുണ്ട്.
കാണുന്നുണ്ടോ?
ആ കാണുന്നുണ്ട്. കുറച്ചുകൂടെ താഴ്ത്തു വയ്ക്കുള്ളൂ. ആ fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Fine.
This
Thank
will
you,
do?
sir. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Cardona and Professor
Thank you, Professor Cardona and Professor Srinivas Varkedi for releasing this book and also accepting our invitation to receive the award. And we are highly obliged to both of you. It is not Paramanu and Parvada. It is both Parvadas we have today. And Guna Puja Sthanam Gunishu Naja Lingam Naja Vayaha.
Right.
Gunaha Puja Sthanam Gunishu Naja Lingam Naja Vayaha.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dr.
Now,
Darshan.
now the vote of thanks will be proposed by Sri Vijayan Raja, the Joint Secretary of the Kunjun Raja Academy of Indological Research. Sri Vijayan Raja.
He is also nephew of Kunjuni Raja.
Yes. Vijayan Raja, please. Vijayan Raja. Please focus on him.
Namaste to all. Please accept our thanks on behalf of Indological Academy of Indological Research. First of all, I thank Professor George Cardona for accepting Centenary Rajaprabha Puraskar and for delivering the inaugural paper, and also for giving prizes to the rank holders in Sanskrit Sahitya of Universities of Kerala. Next, I thank Professor Srinivasa Varakedi Annual Rajaprabha Puraskar. Special thanks to Professor George Cardona and Srinivasa Varakedi for releasing of the book Theories of Aesthetic Architecture. Next, I thank Dr. Preeti and Dr. Purnima Mohan of Sri Shankaracharya University Gallery for their suggestions. I also thank the rank holders Amrita K. Shaini E. and Smita LS and Hima PS for accepting the prizes presented by Professor George Cardona. On behalf of KAIR, I thank all those who are present for this webinar and to all those who will participate in this webinar in the coming days. Now I thank Professor P.C. Murali Madhavan, Professor C.S. Radhakrishnan, Professor K.A. Devendran, Professor E.R. Narayanan, and Girish Palier for convening this webinar. Once again, thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Vijayan Raja. So, before we stand up for the national anthem, tomorrow 10:30, the session will commence. Just a reminder. Now, we all stand up for the national anthem.
National anthem now.
Ganamana Atinayaka Jaya Jaya Bharata Bhagya Vidhada Punjab Sindh Gujarat Maratha Dravida Utkala Vanga Vindhya Himachala Yamuna Ganga Uchala Jadita Danga Tava Shubha Name Jahe Tava Shubha Ashisha Mage Gahe Tava Jaya Gatha Jana Gana Mangala Dayaka Jaya He Bharata Bhagya Vidhata Jaya He Jaya He Jaya He Jaya 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 Jaya. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Screen hostly.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Professor.